I just spent over $500 on ear tips, graphed over 80 different tips, and created this Google Sheet in order to make the ultimate ear tip guide for you guys. Now, tip rolling has always been a very pain in the ass process because not only are everyone's ear shape and canals very different, physically, anatomically, but also every ear tip is slightly different in size, shape, openings, and combine those two factors together with all the different sizes of IEMs on top, you end up getting a whole bunch of different variables that alters the sound, the fit, and the comfort of your listening experience. So in order to address this complexity, I've broken it down into three main categories. Number one, we have the tonality, or how the ear tip sounds and how the ear tip grasps. So we actually have something to compare to, and we're not just guessing and based off of feelings. And then number two, we have the fit of the ear tip itself, the material, the grip. We'll get into that later. And then lastly, number three, we have the adaptability, or how flexible the ear tip is, how easily it adapts, it molds and seals with different ears, different IEMs and shapes, etc. Please go check out the list in the description, in the comments. Let me know what I can do to make it better. I won't be ranking the IEM, it's just going to be in alphabetic order because it's just not possible. Like, one tip might work very well, might fit, might seal, it might be very comfy for one person's ear, and then when it comes to someone else, it just won't fit. So very hard to actually rank the tips, but I did break them down into certain categories like tonality, you got the build, you got the grip strength, just like how sticky and how well the tip stays in your ears, and then you got stuff like the flexibility, or like how well the tip adapts to different ear shapes, and then you have the final recommendation, and etc. That aside, starting off with the tonality, just like how different IEMs can have different sound to them, different tips can also alter the sound of the IEM differently as well. And in order to have the best consistency and avoid any drastic changes, I've measured all the tips on the same coupler, the same size, same PC, same software, to avoid any change in variables and just have a better controlled variable group. And usually with IEMs, we can go off of its stock sound, or like out of the box as the bottom line reference, with the stock tips before modding or using EQ. But since there's no way to actually measure the IEM without a tip, or in other words, there's no quote unquote stock sound, because stock in this case would just be the nozzle without any tips, and that would be pointless because you need the tip to have a seal and actually listen and measure the IEM, right? So the next best baseline is using the most common, the most well-known, the most accessible tip that the vast majority of people have heard or have used, so that everyone can have a better point of reference to start from. And as for our tip of choice, I've decided to go with the KB Year K07s as the baseline of comparison because these are probably the most popular tips. You can think of these as the HARMAN target of IEM tips. I'm not saying these are the best tip per se, but they probably have been in the most amount of years because the vast majority of IEMs ship these, which means most people are probably going to have access to them and can use them as a baseline for comparison. But again, if you have different tips, other tips, more tips that are on the graph, feel free to use those as comparisons as well. With that said, when it comes to tip tonality, some will have a brighter sound, some will have a bassier sound, or maybe a lot smoother when it comes to the treble region. In the sheet, I made a note on how each tip sounds and graphs versus the KB Year K07s. If we take a look at the Software Ultra Clear Titaniums, which has the metal ring in the center, these have a slightly brighter, slightly detailed sound, more sharp in the transients. Now, I won't go through each tip in this video since it's pretty self-explanatory. It's more efficient if you just go to the list, go look at the graph. It's much easier and better if you just go look at the list. Now, tonality side, let's talk about the second area, which is the fit of the tip. And the main purpose of a tip is to essentially seal your ear canal, avoid any air coming in, avoid any air, leaking out. So you have the correct sound that the IEM is trying to portray. There's no distortion, there's no resonance. The sound basically goes strictly directly into your ears without any altering or any changes. And this is typically done through two main ways. Number one, you can do a shallow fit, or number two, you can do a deep fit. So when it comes to shallow fits, this is more of a design based off of the IEM. For example, if your IEM is too big, it won't fit your ears, then the best way is to essentially just have it sit on the surface of your ear canals. You know, you're still going to get a seal, you're still going to get the sound, but it's not going to be as smooth in the treble versus something that has a deeper fit. Now, ideally, you want to get the fit as deep as possible because it avoids any distortion, any alteration to the sound, since, you know, essentially the tip is connecting directly to your ear canal, so the sound goes directly into your ears with less changes in the direction. Whereas if you have a shallow fit that, you know, sits more on the surface edge, the opening of your ear canal, the sound kind of bounces a little bit differently and then it goes inside. If you want the smoothest treble response, if you want the most natural timbre in the highs, I would recommend getting a deep fit. And on top of having a deep fit, you also want to have a wide bore, so the opening, the hole of the tip should be as big as possible while allowing you to have a fairly deep fit into your ears. Now, you want to have a wider bore so you don't constrain the sound to give it a more open feeling. You want to have a bigger surface area for the sound to come out, but this might not be possible depending on the shape of the IEM, the size of the nozzle, the size of your ears. Because, for example, if you have a wide bore and you want to get a deep fit, but your ears are very small and the nozzles are also very big on your IEM, then most likely you're not going to be able to have a deep fit because it's just physically not possible. Like, you can't shove it in deep enough, and it kind of will just sit on the surface of your ears. So the ideal combination is to have a deep fit with a wide bore that will fit deeply into your ears. IEMs with a shallower fit or less thick in the overall width is also going to be a bit hard to shove it deeply unless you have a very long nozzle to kind of compensate for the lack of length. So it really depends. And then shorter nozzles also tend to, you know, not really reach in deep enough. So you would need essentially also a longer tip for shorter nozzles as well. Aside from that, we also have the grip strength of the tip, or how well it stays in your ears, how long it maintains the seal without it breaking and kind of coming loose and slipping out. Usually stickier materials are going to be better for this. For example, liquid silicone, medical silicone, high quality silicone tips are going to be more flexible. They adapt to your ears better, and they also just stick to your ears better because the material itself is going to be stickier versus a plastic silicone that is stiffer but also more slippery, so it slips out of your ears easier and then the seal breaks. Then you gotta readjust the tip and everything. It's a bit more annoying. And material wise, you don't want the tip to be super stiff because it's not gonna stay in shape. It's gonna kind of squeeze, and then because the material itself is harder and stiffer, it has more tension and it pushes itself back out. And what ends up happening is that the tip itself, the IEM, starts falling out of your ears and you lose the seal. And speaking of materials, I do want to talk about the new metal tips. What the metal part essentially does is that it creates more stability for the stem, so that if you do use it with a very wide tip, it doesn't stretch the stem and it doesn't have the edges or the area of the stem collapse into the nozzle, which can block some of the sound, creates more distortion, and leads to a less open sounding feeling. So for example, if you have a shallower IEM, a thinner IEM that kind of sits more on the surface of your ear, and then you have a bigger, wider nozzle on it as well, then you can use one of these metal stem tips to essentially create more stability, more length, to get the sound directly and deeper into your ears. Because again, the point is to have a deep fit that also has a open sound, and the metal part essentially creates the stability to have the hole remain open and not collapse onto itself. Now, when it comes to tonality, most of these metal IEM tips don't really, change the sound too much, aside from the Sophier's ultra clear titaniums. Now, when it comes to foams, these usually create a more smoother sound to the treble. It tames the energy, it makes the transients, the dynamics, the sharpness overall just a lot smoother and softer. And the tip itself is actually very flexible because you just squish it and then you shove it into your ears and you just wait for it to kind of expand back up and mold to the shape of your ears. So when it comes to isolation and seal, foams are very, very good. But the main downside is that the base texture does take a hit, and the overall dynamics, transients also takes a hit. Overall texture imaging to the sound does take a hit because it essentially just smoothens out all the transients and the dynamics, which could be a hit or miss depending on what you're looking for. If you want a smoother playback, the smoothest possible playback, those would be the ASLA Senna, foam maxes. Those are very smooth, but the base texture, the overall, like resolution, the tactility does take a hit because everything is just softer and smoother. Aside from that, material wise, I would recommend going for the liquid silicons, the medical grade silicons, which is just like a, I guess, thicker version, more sturdier version of the liquid silicon, but you still get the stickiness, the grip. So it's like a slightly better version of the liquid silicon and lasts longer because it's less fragile. Now lastly, we have flexibility, or how well a tip molds and adapts to different types of ear sizes, ear shapes, IEM sizes, IEM shapes, nozzle sizes. You want a softer material that allows the tip to adapt. The size and shape of the tip also affects how flexible it is. For example, it shouldn't be like super wide and short where you can only use it to kind of like fit the surface area of your ear canal, so you can't really get a deep fit, or like a cone shape or flanges. You got your double, your triple flanges, which does help with like very deep fits or like very long nozzles, like the Edemotic or just IEMs with like longer nozzles. Those are designed to have it shoved deeply inside your ears, so you do need the flanges, the dual, the triple flanges for that to work. But the issue with that is that it's not gonna work for like a lot of regular size IEMs. And for the flanges on the Edemotics, also hard to get a seal if you have a bigger ear, because the way the design is that it gradually gets smaller. It's not the same size all around. The end of the tip, the bigger area, will seal, but it might not shove in deep enough to kind of reach that wider area, so you end up just getting the first and second ring, and those are smaller than the third ring of the flanges, so it might not seal properly. Depending, it's not like super flexible, but it will do the job if your ears can allow it to go deep enough. And then lastly, the hole or the opening of the tip itself affects the flexibility as well as how stiff, how hard, or how soft the stem is. So for example, if you have a very small hole and a really stiff stem for the tip, you're most likely not going to be able to fit bigger size like nozzles inside, because number one, it's not gonna stretch big enough because it's stiff to allow the bigger, wider nozzle to actually like stay on the tip. And even if you do manage to get the smaller tip onto the bigger nozzle, it's slowly gonna start caving in. It's gonna start blocking some of the surface area of the nozzles, and that's gonna alter the sound. It's gonna cause more peakiness in the treble because it's not completely open anymore directly into your ears. It's gonna start caving in. So the best scenario is that you want the hole to be big enough but also flexible enough so that you can adapt for different nozzle sizes. And also you want the stem to be stiff but not super hard so that it's like not flexible. A good example of this would be the Venus Velvet regular or the wides. The hole opening is very flexible, but also it doesn't affect the overall like flexibility and softness of the stem. So you get the flexibility in the hole. It allows it to have bigger nozzles, but also it allows the bores to stay open and not constrain itself. And a bad example of this would be the Dunu candy tips, because the hole itself is smaller than normal and then the stem is also stiffer. So it took me like a long time to just shove the tip onto the nozzle, and then when it did, it started to cave in on the side a little and start squeezing the stem of the tip itself. But in conclusion, let's go over some of the criteria that you need to check off aside from tonality, because that is subjective. Number one, the tip itself needs to seal your ears, or else there's really no point to this. You would take a shallower fit over a deeper fit if the shallow one actually seals your ears and the deeper fitting IEM doesn't seal your ear, right? Number two, that aside, you do want a deeper fitting IEM, so there's just less distortion, less changes, less alteration in the way the sound bounces, so it goes directly into your ear canal. Then number three, you want the bore size, the width to be as open as possible while giving you the deepest fit as possible. Then after that, we have the grip strength of the tip itself, or how well it stays in your ears. So here we're looking for stickier materials like liquid silicon, medical grade silicon. You want to avoid slippery materials or like stiffer materials that pushes the IEM back out. You want something that's softer and grippier. And then after that, you want the hole opening of the IEM itself to be big enough so that it could fit different types of IEMs, different types of nozzle sizes, and then you also want the stem area of the IEM to not be super stiff, but also stiff enough and enough length so that it creates a deeper fit as well. Anyhow, that aside, this is the first part of the guide. I may do a tier list depending on how much time I have, because there's a lot of IEMs tips to talk about, not IEM, a lot of tips to talk about. There's like over 80 graph on the database under Strela, so go check that out. Go check out the list. Let me know what I can do better. Let me know like what other ideas you guys have that could make the list better itself. And aside from that, I hope this video was helpful, and I will see everyone in the next one.
Shout out to Dom Q, Rox Cat, B Urac, Disco Scaldus, Walker Standard, Patrick, User, Contain Guava Juice Gains, Mr. Gorillas, Polly J, Gis Sang Young, Christopher Jackson, Henry Claudia, Son of a Horse, 777ZK, PM the Wizard, Obi, Triple Well Extended, Matt Herc, TR8107, Shrimp Backlay, FKSRG, Cousin Fat Fat, Julius Phillip, Dead Riddle, Gatoy, Nico Gabriel, Addy, Michael, Trackstar, Raphael, I'm J-Rack, Ryan, Ori, Edwin, Torcog, Effinadim, Rash, Chimika, Javir, Gilbog, Ocean, AK131, BC Knight, and then Gelato, Watjo, Vitor, Unbalanced, Tuna, Robert, Polar, the Guatemalian, Drave, JRX, Samuel, John Simmon, Archie, Beefy Pigeon, Peter Walton, Slow-Mo Rain, Dulsington, My Name is Jeff, Oscar, Chrono, The Audio Freak, Evan, and Forrest. Thank you guys so much for the support.